The heart wants what it wants, but the mind pays the bills, and culture writes the rules. I'm a 47-year-old Canadian tech consultant, and I need to tell you about the biggest mistake I've made in the last decade. Though honestly, I'm still not sure if it was actually a mistake or just bad timing. Either way, I'm living with the consequences every single day, and I'm hoping someone out there has walked this path before me and can offer some wisdom. See, I've always been the guy who had his life figured out. Divorced once in my early 30s when I caught my ex-wife cheating with her yoga instructor. Cliché, I know, but it happened. Learned my lessons from that disaster, focused on my career in cybersecurity consulting, traveled when I wanted, dated casually without getting too attached. I had my routine down pat. Work hard, play harder, keep things simple. No drama, no complications, no surprises. I built a good life in Toronto. Nice condo overlooking Lake Ontario, BMW in the underground garage, six-figure income that let me take contracts around the world. I was the guy my married friends envied, free to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, with whoever I wanted. At least, that's what I told myself. That all changed 3 years ago when I took a contract job in Pattaya, Thailand, and let me tell you, that decision rippled through my life in ways I never could have predicted. Now, I've worked overseas before, 6 months in London updating banking systems, a year in Dubai helping oil companies modernize their IT infrastructure, 8 months in Sydney working with mining operations. But Thailand was different from the moment I stepped off the plane at Changi Airport. The energy there, the mix of cultures, the way East meets West on every street corner, it was intoxicating in a way that caught me completely off guard. The humidity hit me like a wall, but underneath that oppressive heat was something electric. Street food vendors next to luxury shopping centers, ancient temples squeezed between gleaming skyscrapers, conversations flowing seamlessly between English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. It was chaos and order existing in perfect harmony, and I was mesmerized. I was there to help a fintech startup called QuantumPay modernize their cybersecurity systems. They were processing millions in cryptocurrency transactions daily, but running on infrastructure that belonged in 2015. It was exactly the kind of challenge I lived for. Complex, high stakes, with enough technical depth to keep me engaged for the contracted 8 months. The company set me up in a serviced apartment in the Marina Bay area, 32nd floor, with a view of the Thailand Flyer and the harbor. Every morning I'd have my coffee on the balcony, watching the container ships navigate between the offshore islands, feeling like I was at the center of something important. I wasn't looking for anything romantic. Hell, I wasn't even looking for anything social. I'd learned the hard way that mixing business with pleasure, especially on international contracts, was a recipe for complications. I was there to work, bank some serious money, and maybe explore the region on weekends. Clean, simple, professional. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, and mine came in the form of a cultural orientation session that QuantumPay required for all foreign contracts. Her name was Maylin Chen, and she was the cultural liaison assigned to help expats navigate the intricate web of Thailand's business customs and social expectations. 20 years old, third-generation Thailandan Chinese, with a master's degree in international business from NUS, and a presence that commanded attention the moment she walked into the conference room. The first time I saw her, she was explaining to a group of about 15 of us, Americans, European, Australians, why understanding the concept of faith in Asian business culture wasn't just helpful, it was essential for survival. She wore a navy blue blazer and pencil skirt, professional but not stuffy, and had this way of making complex cultural concepts seem not just obvious, but fascinating. In Western culture, she said, clicking through her presentation, you might think directness is honesty. In Asian culture, directness without consideration for faith can be seen as rudeness or even aggression. It's not about being fake, it's about being skilled in human relationships. She used real examples from her consulting work. The American executive who killed a deal by publicly correcting a Thailandan client's English. The Australian manager who couldn't understand why his direct reports weren't more assertive in meetings. She wasn't lecturing us, she was translating 2 different languages of human interaction. I remember thinking she was attractive, sure, but more than that, she was intelligent in a way that demanded respect. She answered questions with nuance, challenged assumptions without being condescending, and had this infectious enthusiasm for helping people understand each other across cultural divides. I wasn't the only one who noticed. 3 other guys in the session were clearly interested, asking pointed questions that had nothing to do with business culture and everything to do with extending their interaction with her. But here's where it gets complicated, and here's the first red flag I should have paid attention to. During the coffee break, one of the other "Careful with that one, mate," he said, nodding toward Maylin as she engaged in animated conversation with 2 other participants. Local girls, like her, especially the educated ones, they're not just looking for a good time. They want the whole package. Marriage, security, someone to help them build a future. You start something with her, you better be ready to finish it because she'll be planning your wedding before you know what hit you. I laughed it off, the way you do when someone gives you advice you don't want to hear. I was 44, divorced, financially secure, and had absolutely no intention of getting serious about anyone, let alone someone nearly 20 years younger, living on the other side of the world. But that warning should have been a neon sign flashing "Danger ahead" in letters 10 feet tall. Instead, I found myself staying after the sessions to ask her questions. Innocent stuff at first: where to get the best laksa, which neighborhoods were safe to explore on foot, how to navigate the MRT system without looking like a complete tourist. She was knowledgeable, funny, and had this fascinating perspective on being caught between worlds: traditional Chinese family values and modern Western career ambition. "It's like living in 2 different movies at the same time," she told me one evening over coffee at a shop near her office in Raffles Place. We'd been talking for over an hour about everything from Thailand's history to the challenges of being a woman in Asian business culture. "My parents want me to be the dutiful daughter, marry someone they approve of, someone who can provide security, give them grandchildren to carry on the family name. But I also want my independence, my career, my own choices about who I love and how I live." The coffee shop was one of those old-school Thailand places with marble-topped tables and elderly Chinese men playing xiangqi in the corner. The air conditioning battled against the tropical heat, and ceiling fans stirred the humid air lazily above our heads. She'd loosened up since the formal presentation, traded the blazer for a simple blouse, and I found myself studying the way she gestured when she talked about things she was passionate about. "What do your parents think about your career?" I asked. "They're proud but worried," she said, stirring sugar into her kopi. "Proud that I'm successful, but worried that success is making me too independent, too picky about men. They keep introducing me to suitable candidates, doctors, lawyers, businessmen from good families, all very accomplished, all very boring." I should have heard the longing in her voice when she talked about wanting her own choices. I should have recognized the internal conflict between family expectations and personal desires. Instead, I was charmed by her honesty and increasingly attracted to her complexity. "What about you?" she asked. "What's the Canadian approach to family expectations?" "Much more hands-off," I said. "My parents want me to be happy, but they figure that's my job to figure out. My sister bugs me occasionally about settling down again, but mostly people mind their own business." "That sounds—" She paused, searching for the right word. The way she said it, with a mixture of envy and wonder, should have been another red flag, but I was too busy enjoying the conversation to pay attention to the subtext. What started as professional courtesy and cultural curiosity slowly evolved into something more personal over the following weeks. Maylin offered to show me real Thailand, not the tourist attractions, but the hawker centers her grandmother had taken her to as a child, the temples where her family still worshipped every Chinese New Year, the neighborhoods where ordinary people lived their ordinary lives away from the expat bubble. I was fascinated. Here was someone offering me a glimpse into a world I never would have discovered on my own, and she was an articulate, engaging guide who made every experience feel like an adventure. Our first real outing was to a hawker center in Chinatown on a sweltering Saturday afternoon. The place was a sensory overload, dozens of food stalls surrounding communal seating areas, the air thick with the smell of char kway teow, satay, and durian. The noise was incredible. Vendors shouting orders, the sizzle of woks, conversations in multiple languages creating a symphony of urban life. Maylin guided me through the maze of stalls, like a conductor orchestrating a meal. You have to try the bok chor mee from Uncle Lim, she said, pointing to a stall run by an elderly man who looked like he'd been cooking noodles since Thailand's independence. He's been here 40 years, still uses his father's recipe. She ordered for both of us in rapid Hokkien, the vendor's weathered face breaking into a grin when she introduced me as her Canadian friend. The noodles arrived in chipped bowls, looking nothing like the sanitized Asian food I was used to back home, but tasting like heaven. Complex, spicy, with flavors that had been developing for generations. This is how most Thailandans eat, she explained, gesturing around the crowded center where families shared tables with strangers, children played between the aisles, and the rhythm of daily life played out over shared meals. Not the fancy restaurants in Marina Bay, not the hotel buffets. This is real Thailand. I was captivated, not just by the food or the atmosphere, but by her obvious love for this place and these people. She knew vendors by name, asked about their families, slipped seamlessly between languages depending on who she was talking to. This was her world, and she was sharing it with me. After lunch, she took me to the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple, a massive complex that felt like stepping into another century. The architecture was stunning, all red and gold with intricate carvings, but what struck me was how natural she looked there. She knew the rituals, the proper way to light incense, the significance of different Buddha statues. My grandmother brought me here every week when I was little, she explained, as we watched elderly devotees performing their prayers. I'm not particularly religious, but this place, it connects me to something larger than myself, you know? I didn't know, actually. I'd been raised loosely Protestant, but had never felt that kind of spiritual connection to anything. Watching her in that space, I realized there were depths to her experience that I might never fully understand. That evening, she walked me through the streets of Chinatown as the sun set and the neon signs began to flicker to life. We talked about everything, her childhood torn between English school and Chinese traditions, my divorce and what I'd learned about relationships, her frustrations with Thailand's competitive culture, my love for the freedom that consulting work provided. Do you ever get lonely? She asked as we sat on a bench in a small park, watching the city's lights reflect off the Thailand River. Sometimes, I admitted, but I've gotten good at keeping busy. Work, travel, hobbies, there's always something to do. That's not the same thing as not being lonely, she pointed out gently. She was right, of course. I had gotten good at staying busy, but that was different from being fulfilled. I'd been running from emotional connection for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want someone in my life for more than just companionship or physical attraction. What about you? I asked. Ever get tired of family expectations and cultural obligations? She was quiet for a long moment, watching a boat full of tourists navigate the river. Every day, she finally said, but you can't just abandon who you are, where you come from. We started spending more time together after that. Dinners after her work finished, weekend explorations of different neighborhoods, long conversations over coffee that stretched into the evening. She showed me hidden temples tucked between modern buildings, took me to night markets where the food was incredible and the crowds were energizing, taught me to appreciate the subtle differences between Teochew and Cantonese cuisine. I was learning Thailand through her eyes, but more than that, I was learning about her. She was ambitious but thoughtful, independent but deeply connected to family, modern but rooted in tradition. The combination was intoxicating. The physical attraction was undeniable from the beginning, but we both seemed content to let it build slowly. There was something delicious about the tension, the accidental touches, the way she'd look at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. We were both adults, both aware of what was happening, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to rush it. That changed one evening about 6 weeks after we'd started spending time together. We'd been to a rooftop bar in Chinatown. Nothing fancy, just a place with cheap drinks and a great view of the city skyline. The conversation had been more personal than usual. She told me about a relationship that had ended badly the year before. I'd shared more details about my divorce and why I'd sworn off serious relationships. So what is this then? She asked as we walked back toward the MRT station. What we're doing? It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about too carefully. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm enjoying your company. I hope you're enjoying mine. I am, she said, stopping under a streetlight. But I need to know if this is just entertainment for you, something to make your time in Thailand more interesting. The way she asked it, directly but vulnerably, made me realize how unfair I was being. She wasn't some casual fling. She was a smart, accomplished woman who deserved honesty about my intentions, even if I wasn't entirely clear on them myself. It's not entertainment, I said. I struggled for the right words. It's the best part of being here. You're the best part of being here. She smiled then, the kind of smile that changes everything, and when she kissed me, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. But even as we kissed under that streetlight with the sounds of Thailand's nightlife buzzing around us, I should have been paying attention to the deeper currents. She wasn't just attracted to me, she was evaluating me, and I was too caught up in the moment to realize it. The relationship deepened quickly after that night, but looking back, I can see now that we were operating under completely different sets of assumptions about what we were building together. For me, it was the most intense connection I'd had with a woman in years. Maylin was intelligent, funny, passionate about her work and her culture, and the physical chemistry between us was incredible. She challenged me intellectually, introduced me to new ways of thinking about the world, and made me feel more alive than I had since my 20s. But I was still thinking like a temporary expat. This was a fantastic relationship with an amazing woman, but it had a built-in expiration date when my contract ended. I assumed she understood that, even though we never explicitly discussed it. For her, I realized much later, I represented something entirely different. I was a successful Western man who treated her as an equal, who was fascinated by her culture rather than trying to change her, who offered a potential path to a different kind of life than the one her family expected her to live. The first sign of trouble came about 2 months into our relationship. We were having dinner at her favorite Zichar place in Toa Payoh, one of those neighborhood joints where the food is incredible, but the ambiance is fluorescent lights and plastic chairs. She'd been quieter than usual all evening, picking at her sambal kangkung instead of eating with her usual enthusiasm. "My parents want to meet you," she said suddenly, not looking up from her plate. I nearly choked on my tiger beer. "Meet me? We've only been... isn't that kind of fast?" she finished. "Yes, it's fast, but they know I've been spending time with someone, and they're curious." In my Western mindset, meeting parents was a significant step, but not necessarily a commitment. It was what you did when a relationship got serious enough that hiding it became more work than just introducing everyone. But I could tell from her tone that in her world it carried much more weight. "What did you tell them about me?" I asked carefully. "The truth, that you're a Canadian consultant working here temporarily, that you're intelligent and kind, that I enjoy spending time with you." The word excited felt loaded with implications I wasn't ready to deal with. "Maylin, you know my situation here is temporary, right? My contract has a specific end date." "I know," she said, but something in her voice suggested that she was thinking of that as a problem to be solved rather than a fact to be accepted. "Maybe we should wait," I said, "see how things develop naturally before involving families." The hurt that flashed across her face was brief but unmistakable. "Of course," she said. "You're right, no need to rush things." But the damage was done. I had essentially told her that she wasn't important enough for me to meet her parents, which wasn't what I meant, but was how it landed. And she had revealed that she was thinking about our relationship in terms that included family integration, which terrified me. We managed to smooth things over that night, but a new tension had entered our dynamic. She became more careful about mentioning the future, and I became hyper-aware of any conversation that seemed to be heading in that direction. My contract got extended. What was supposed to be 8 months turned into a year, then 18 months as quantum-paced security needs became more complex. Maylin and I grew closer in many ways, but I started noticing patterns that should have concerned me more than they did. She would ask seemingly casual questions about my life in Canada. What was my condo like? How much did senior consultants typically make there? What was Toronto's tech scene like for someone with her background? What was the immigration process like for skilled workers? At first, I thought she was just curious about my world, the way I had been curious about hers. I answered honestly, even showed her photos of my place, my neighborhood, my life back home. But gradually, I began to realize that she wasn't just making conversation, she was conducting research. She started talking more about her frustrations with Thailand's work culture, the pressure to conform, the limited opportunities for someone in her field. She complained about the cost of living, the competitive social dynamics, the expectations placed on unmarried women her age. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to start over somewhere else, she said one evening as we walked along the Marina Bay waterfront. Somewhere where I could just be myself, without all the baggage of family expectations and cultural obligation. Where would you go? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Maybe Canada, she said, glancing at me sideways. It sounds peaceful, less complicated. I should have recognized that she was building a case for leaving Thailand and that I was the vehicle she was considering for that escape. Instead, I was flattered that she found my country appealing and proud that I was representing it well. The sex had become incredible as we grew more comfortable with each other. She was passionate and adventurous, willing to explore and experiment in ways that kept our physical connection exciting. But I began to notice that our most intimate moments were often followed by conversations about the future, about possibilities, about what-if scenarios that all seemed to involve me taking her away from her current life. The cultural exchange continued to fascinate me. She taught me Mandarin phrases, explained the significance of various festivals, helped me understand the complex social hierarchies that govern Thailand's business world. I shared stories about Canadian culture, taught her to appreciate hockey, unsuccessfully, and introduced her to foods from back home that were available in Thailand's international markets. But underneath all of this enriching cultural sharing, I began to sense that I wasn't just her boyfriend. I was her exit strategy, and she wasn't just my lover. She was becoming my responsibility in ways I hadn't signed up for. The realization crystallized during Chinese New Year about 14 months into our relationship. She invited me to her family's reunion dinner, the most important meal of the year in Chinese culture. I knew this was significant, but I underestimated just how significant. The dinner was held at her parents' HB flat in Ang Mo Kio, a modest but comfortable space that had been decorated with red banners and gold decorations for the holiday. Her extended family was there, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, probably 20 people total crammed into the living and dining areas. I was the only non-Chinese person there, and definitely the only foreigner. Everyone was polite, but I could feel the weight of their curiosity and evaluation. This wasn't just meet the boyfriend. This was meet the potential son-in-law. Her father, a man in his early 60s who worked in logistics for a shipping company, spent most of the evening asking me pointed questions about my work, my finances, my family back home, my intentions regarding his daughter. Her mother, quieter but equally observant, asked about my previous marriage, my thoughts on children, my plans for the future. Questions weren't rude, but they were thorough. By the end of the evening, they knew more about my financial situation than some of my close friends back home. They knew about my divorce, my career trajectory, my family structure, my long-term goals. I answered as honestly as I could, but I felt like I was being interviewed for a job I wasn't sure I wanted, and the job description seemed to include not just being Maylin's boyfriend, but being her ticket to a different life. The evening reached its climax when her grandmother, a tiny woman in her 80s who had been quietly observing from her chair in the corner, beckoned me over. She spoke to me in halting English, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maylin is good girl," she said, grasping my hand with surprising strength. "She take care of you, you take care of her, yes?" It wasn't really a question, it was a blessing and a responsibility being placed on my shoulders simultaneously. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was panicking. These people weren't just meeting their daughter's boyfriend, they were welcoming a future family member. Maylin was glowing as we left her parents' flat that night. "They love you," she said as we waited for a taxi. "My father said you're a good man, very stable. My mother thinks you're handsome and polite. Even my grandmother approves, and she's very particular about men. They're lovely people, I said, and I meant it, but the weight of their expectations felt crushing. I'm so happy they got to meet you properly, she continued. Now we can start planning. Planning what? I asked, though I was afraid I knew the answer. Our future, she said simply. Now that the families know each other, we can make real plans. That should have been our moment of truth. The moment when we both acknowledged that we had very different ideas about what we were building together and what the timeline looked like. Instead, I did what guys do when faced with emotional complexity that requires immediate decision-making. I changed the subject and hoped it would work itself out somehow. But it wasn't going to work itself out, and the longer I avoided the conversation, the more complicated and painful it was going to become for both of us. Things came to a head during my second Christmas in Thailand, about 16 months into our relationship. Maylin had been hinting for months about visiting Canada, about meeting my friends and family, about experiencing a real Canadian winter. The hints had become less subtle over time, evolving into direct suggestions and finally into what felt like expectation. I finally invited her to come back with me for the holidays, partly because I wanted to share my world with her the way she had shared hers with me, but mostly because I was running out of reasons to avoid it that didn't make me look like a complete asshole. The trip was a disaster, but not in the way you might expect. Maylin loved Canada. She loved everything about it: the snow, the space, the clean air, the politeness of strangers, the efficiency of public services, the multicultural makeup of Toronto without the underlying tensions that existed in Thailand. She fell in love with my condo, my neighborhood, my lifestyle, my friends. She charmed everyone she met. My sister Sarah and her husband invited us for dinner twice and kept telling me how lucky I was. My friends from the consulting world found her fascinating and intelligent. Even my parents, who had kept at arm's length since my divorce, warmed to her immediately when we visited them in Vancouver. She learned to ski during our 3 weeks there, throwing herself into the experience with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. She loved the mountains, the winter sports culture, the après-ski socializing. She fit into my Canadian life seamlessly, like a piece I hadn't realized was missing. But I watched her calculating everything: the cost of living compared to Thailand, the job market for someone with her skills and background, the social dynamics of Canadian workplace culture, the immigration requirements for skilled workers. She wasn't just experiencing Canada, she was evaluating it as a potential new home. She researched everything: housing prices in different Toronto neighborhoods, Canadian immigration policy, professional licensing requirements for her field, cultural integration programs for new immigrants. She approached it with the same thoroughness she brought to her consulting work, gathering data and building scenarios. I could be happy here, she said on our last night as we sat in my living room watching the snow fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I could build a life here, a real life. What about your life in Thailand? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Your family, your job, your friends? My job is just a job, she said. It pays well, but it's not my passion. My friends, most of them are getting married and moving away anyway, and my family. She paused, choosing her words carefully. My family wants me to be happy. If I'm happy, they'll understand eventually. Maylin, I said carefully, what exactly are we talking about here? I'm talking about us, she said, turning to face me fully. About building something real together. About not wasting any more time pretending this is just a temporary thing that will end when your contract does. And there it was. The conversation I'd been avoiding for over a year, laid out in stark terms that didn't leave room for ambiguity or deflection. She wanted commitment, marriage, a shared future. She wanted me to sponsor her immigration to Canada, to help her build a new life away from everything she'd ever known. I didn't know what I wanted. I cared about her deeply, possibly loved her, but the idea of being responsible for someone's entire life transition, of becoming their anchor in a new country and culture, of taking on the role of husband and provider and cultural guide, it terrified me. This is a big conversation, I said, stalling for time. Maybe we should talk about it when we get back to Thailand, when we're both thinking clearly. The disappointment in her eyes was crushing, but she nodded. Of course. You're right. This is too important to rush. But we both knew that my response was already an answer. If I had felt the same way she did, if I had wanted the same future she was envisioning, I wouldn't have needed time to think about it. I handled the aftermath of that conversation badly. Instead of having an honest discussion about my fears and reservations when we returned to Thailand, I retreated emotionally. I became more guarded, less available, more focused on work. I told myself I was giving us both space to think, but really, I was hoping the issue would somehow resolve itself without requiring me to make a definitive choice. Maylin went back to Thailand. She was still affectionate when we were together, still engaged in our conversations, but there was a distance now that hadn't been there before. She stopped talking about the future in concrete terms. She stopped asking about Canada or immigration or my long-term plans. She started working longer hours and spending more time with her family. I knew I was losing her, but I couldn't bring myself to either fight for the relationship or end it cleanly. I was trapped in my own indecision, and she was paying the price for my inability to be honest about what I wanted. The end came 6 months later, but not in the dramatic confrontation I had been expecting. Instead, it came through a series of small retreats and growing silences that eventually made it clear that we were no longer building something together. We were just going through the motions of a relationship that had lost its direction. The final catalyst was unexpected. I was in her apartment one evening when her phone rang. It was her mother, and they spoke in rapid Mandarin for several minutes. When she hung up, she was crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, moving to comfort her. "My grandmother is in the hospital," she said. "The doctors don't think she has much time left." I held her while she cried, and I felt something shift inside me. This woman I claimed to care about was facing a family crisis, and my first thought wasn't how to support her, it was how this might complicate our already strained relationship. That's when I knew I wasn't the partner she deserved. "I need to spend more time with my family," she said, "while I still can." "Of course," I said, "whatever you need." But what she needed was a partner who understood that when you love someone, their family becomes your family, their crises become your crises, their future becomes intertwined with yours in ways that require sacrifice and commitment. I wasn't ready for that level of integration, and my hesitation in that moment told her everything she needed to know about where I stood. Her grandmother passed away 3 weeks later. I attended the funeral, met extended family members, participated in rituals I didn't fully understand but tried to respect. It was a beautiful service, full of traditions that spoke to the depth of family bonds and cultural continuity that I had never experienced in my own life. But even there, surrounded by her grieving family, I felt like an outsider looking in. I was offering support, but I wasn't truly integrated into their world in the way that a committed partner would be. After the funeral, Maylin and I had the conversation we should have had months earlier. "I need to know where this is going," she said as we sat in a coffee shop near her office. "I can't keep pretending that we're just taking things as they come when I'm 28 years old and need to make decisions about my life." "I care about you," I said, "more than I've cared about anyone in years. But not enough to commit to building a future together." It wasn't a question, and we both knew the answer. I cared about her, but not enough to overcome my fear of commitment, my attachment to my independence, my reluctance to take responsibility for someone else's major life decisions. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "So am I," she replied. My contract ended 2 months after Maylin's grandmother's funeral. We had continued seeing each other sporadically during that time, but we both knew our relationship had reached its natural conclusion. The intensity was gone, replaced by a kind of sad tenderness that made every interaction feel like a goodbye. I left Thailand without asking her to come with me. She didn't ask to come. We both understood that our relationship had been built on fundamentally different expectations about the future, and that no amount of caring could bridge that gap. We stayed in touch for a while after I returned to Canada. Friendly emails, occasional video calls, updates on our respective lives. She got promoted at work, started traveling more for business, seemed to be building the independent life she had always wanted. I took on some interesting new projects, bought a bigger condo, dated occasionally but nothing serious. The updates gradually became less frequent, the calls more perfunctory. We were both moving forward with our lives, but separately. The last significant conversation we had was about a year ago. She called to tell me she was engaged to a Thailandan cardiologist named Deepening, someone her parents approved of, someone who wanted the same things she wanted, someone who was ready to build a life in the same place she wanted to build hers. "He's a good man," she said, "very different from you, but good in his own way. We want the same things." I congratulated her and meant it. I was genuinely happy that she had found someone who could give her the commitment and partnership she deserved. But after I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. She sent me a wedding invitation 6 months later. I didn't attend. We both agreed it would be awkward, but I sent a gift and a note wishing her happiness. I meant every word of it. Here's what keeps me up at night. 3 years after leaving Thailand, I still don't know if I made the right choice. Part of me knows that I did the honest thing. I recognized that we wanted different things at different stages of our lives, and I didn't string her along with false promises or half-hearted commitments. I let her go so she could find someone who could give her what she needed. But another part of me wonders if I was just a coward, if I let fear of commitment and change override what could have been the most meaningful relationship of my life. If I was so focused on protecting my independence that I sacrificed my chance at real partnership. The practical obstacles were real. The age difference meant we were at different life stages with different priorities. The cultural differences required navigation and compromise that not everyone is equipped for. The geographic complications would have required one of us to give up our established life and start over somewhere new. But other couples overcome these challenges every day. People fall in love across cultures, across age gaps, across continents, and they make it work because they're committed to making it. I've dated since coming back to Canada, but nothing has come close to what I had with Maylin. The women I meet are more age-appropriate, more culturally similar, more aligned with my lifestyle and expectations, but none of them have challenged me the way she did, or awakened a side of me. Last week I found myself walking the harborfront in Toronto, the same path I used to take before my life intersected with Maylin's. It was a crisp spring evening, and the lake shimmered with the last gold light of day. Joggers passed me, bundled couples strolled with coffee in hand, and the city buzzed softly in the background. And there I was, alone, successful, free, everything I used to think I wanted. But that night, I pulled out an old photo I had tucked away deep in my phone. It was from that Chinese New Year dinner in her parents' flat. Someone had captured it without us noticing. Maylin's. That photo destroyed me for a minute. Because no matter how logical the breakup was, love isn't logical. And I think a part of me will always wonder what life would have looked like if I'd been brave enough to choose love over comfort, connection over independence, courage over control. Maybe I was right to walk away. Maybe we were never meant to survive the collision between our worlds. But still, when I close my eyes, I hear her voice in that coffee shop. Even when it feels suffocating, you can't just abandon who you are. I couldn't give her the life she deserved, but she gave me something I didn't know I needed, a window into a different way of loving, of living. And that's the strange, bittersweet truth of it all. She was never mine to keep, but she was mine to learn from. And I'm still learning every single day.